Do you put your money where your mouth is? I'm Simon Rafe, and I'm taking the hard line. Hello there, and welcome back to Hardline, the show that, according to analytics, people watch each episode only once. Make of that what you will. I'm your host, Simon Rafe, and joining me later will be Joe Enders, my producer, and host of his own show, Red Top Report. And after that, we'll be chatting with Bradley Eli, who has a counterpoint to a previous Hardline. But for now, money. What are your requirements as a Catholic? Not the things you should do, or the things that are a really good idea to do, or the things that you feel or even know you have to do, or you'd end up falling into some kind of sin or even damnation. We all have those things. We should say the rosary each day, for example. We should bow our heads at the name of Jesus. We might make fine introspection of our souls and tendency to sin and say that unless we block certain websites or cable channels, we will inevitably fall into sin. So we have to do that. We should avoid sin and practice virtue. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the formal, minimal requirements that the Church places on us as lay Catholics. What do we have to do? I'm talking about the precepts of the Church, and there are 5 of them. To attend Mass on Sundays and other holy days of obligation. To receive the Eucharist at least once a year. To go to confession at least once a year. To observe the rules of fasting and abstinence specified by the Church. Now, those are not particularly onerous, are they? Those are things you are certainly doing. Of course, they are a minimum, the lowest bar, but it's hardly the topic for a hardline to tell you you need to do these things when you're already doing them, is it? Oh wait, that's only 4 of them. The 5th is that you shall provide for the needs of the Church. You'll support the Church. That means physically. Practically, not spiritually with thoughts and prayers, but with concrete economic support. In modern times, that means money. Cold, hard cash. Yeah, this is the hard line. You have to support the Church, which means, well, supporting the Church. Pro-life groups, activism groups, advancing some noble social agenda, even an explicitly Catholic one, they aren't the Church. Soup kitchens, even ones run by the Church, aren't the Church. The Knights of Columbus aren't the Church. Your Bible study isn't the Church. We, Church militant, aren't the Church. And the legal fees of a cancelled priest fighting unjust persecution by the Church aren't the Church. Now, this doesn't mean you shouldn't support those things. You should, especially supporting us, of course. But these things aren't the Church. They are good things, they are Catholic things, they are works of charity and almsgiving, and absolutely you should support them, but they're not the Church, and you shouldn't support them instead of the Church. What is the Church? Well, your parish, your diocese, and the Vatican. These are the levels of the Church, but the one you interact with the most and the one you should be directly supporting is your parish. Now, I know what you're thinking because we've all thought of it and some of us have said it. I won't support my parish until such and such happens. Now, usually, such and such is something the parish doesn't have any control over, like the removal of all the homosexuals from the priesthood or the restoration of the Latin Mass by the Vatican. Or maybe, I won't support my parish because the priest is a flaming liberal. Or, I won't support my parish because the money will just go to pay for sex abuse settlements at the Chancery or woke garbage in the Vatican. All of those are straight facts, but they are not the truth. Let's take them one at a time. First off, if your priest is some awful liberal and you cannot convert him otherwise, why are you there? Go somewhere else. Leaving should, of course, be your last resort. You should try to fight for the faith, even against a bad priest. Leaving is the last resort, but withholding cash is not the penultimate resort. It's not a resort at all. Supporting the Church is a precept. There are only 5 of them. That's like half the number of commandments Moses brought down from Sinai. Don't be mucking them up. Maybe you can't leave. Maybe all the priests in your area are bad. I believe it. 100%, no argument there. But we settled the Donatist debate back in the 6th century, and that was like quite a while ago. The personal holiness of the priest has nothing to do with the efficacy of the sacraments, and you are going to him for them. Out of the 5 precepts of the Church, you are fulfilling 3 of them through him. Mass, confession, Eucharist. He's baptizing your children. He's marrying you and your sweetheart, the hitherto mentioned bohemian chick in your philosophy class with the pretty eyes. He's good enough to employ, but not pay. Now, the case is even worse if we're looking for some resolution he has no power over. When the church throws the bums out, we promise. My brother in Christ, when the church has no sinners in it, there will be no money because we will all be walking on pavements out of the fever dream of William Devane. There will always be tares among the wheat, and holding support of the church to some perfectionist ransom is not only unreasonable and just plain dumb, but also unfair to the poor parish priest trying to get you to heaven. Again, he's good enough to employ but not pay? Some of your money will go to pay off lawsuits or even to promote woke garbage at the Vatican or your local chancery. And this is true, and the latter is very sad and awful, and we should do everything we can to minimize that. Do not give to the CSA or the Bishop's Appeal. Shred the Peter's Pence letter. If you are some mover and shaker who dines at the country club with your wife Persephone, who has ditched most of her bohemian chic but still rocks a little bit of batik print during the regatta and you love her for it, ignore the bishop's phone call when he asks you to make up the shortfall. But don't neglect your parish. That is where the bloody work of your salvation is done, and the priest is the surgeon. He hears your confession, he baptizes your children, he brings you God in the flesh. Again, he's good enough to employ, but not pay. And yes, some of the money will go to pay for lawsuits because of sex abuse. The abuse crisis is a terrible thing, and the bishops have done nothing meaningful to prevent it, and we know the cause, but no one will listen to us, and do these victims not deserve some measure of justice? They have been abused and marginalized, and it's been covered up, and many of them are broken, and they cannot work, and they have PTSD, and are suffering, and what? They go to the law to get justice. We always tell them to do that. They go to the law to get justice, and there is no justice to be had this side of eternity, but there is some tiny shadow of it that comes with a settlement which might help them rebuild their shattered lives. And yes, it is money, and money is tawdry and awful, but it's all there is. I know what you are saying. The bishops are sitting on huge endowments, massive piles of real estate, money in the bank, slush funds, and accounts in the Caymans. They should use that before they tax us. Well, maybe and maybe not. That real estate is the patrimony of the church. Those are our parishes, our cathedrals, wonderful art and architecture. But the rest, sure, they could. They should. They don't. They are corrupt and they hold the levers of power, and there is little, if anything, we can do to change it. But withholding cash from the parish doesn't help. It doesn't force their hand because they just tax the parishes more and leave pastors destitute and with a leaking roof and unable to make ends meet. If we refuse to support the church, if we refuse to support our parish, and don't tell me this doesn't happen because I've heard it 1,000 times from people, I've stopped giving to my parish. If we refuse to support our parish, the only person we are hurting is our priest, the man who forgives us our sins, the man who baptizes our children, the man who brings us the Eucharist, the man who married us, who counsels us, prays for us, who gave up his life to wear black and a backwards collar and to help people. Apparently, he's good enough to employ, but not pay. Now, there are sometimes ways to help the parish without allowing the diocese to take a cut. You can pay vendors like the electricity company or the water department directly. That's one suggestion. But there are only so many bills that can be paid that way, and in all honesty, the diocese are wily and are wise to most of these tricks. Withholding money from your parish doesn't hurt anyone except them. Support your priest because he's supported you. He's good enough to employ, so he's good enough to pay. And that is a further, wider hardline. Anyone you employ, anyone whose services you take advantage of, anyone whose product you use, you should pay. A laborer is worth his wages. Slavery and theft are wrong. You're watching this show. Thank you. Starting in April, this program, along with Forward Boldly and the Michael Voris Show, will be going premium. You won't be able to get it for free. So sign up now for a premium subscription so you can watch it, and also so you can support us because you watch us. You use our product. You take the fruits of our labors and benefit from them. You, quite honestly, have a moral obligation to support us if you are in any way able to. And that support means financial, not prayers and encouragement alone. Premium is $10 a month. It gets you access to everything. If you can support us more, if you feel we are worth more than 33 cents a day, why not up that to $1? Join the $1 a day campaign. $30 each month, $1 a day. Apparently, we're good enough to employ, but are we good enough to pay? So Joe, I'm going to ask you what you think, but first off, I'm going to preface this to everyone by saying your voice is probably a little cracked, a little bruised, a little suffering, a little worn out, because you were out cutting it up with Antifa and shouting them down, and they were shouting you down and stuff.
Yeah, that was, let's just say we had quite an active weekend. Trying to tell these drag queens to stay away from children.
Yeah, this was one of those drag queen story hour businesses local to here, wasn't it? Yeah. Well, of course, that will be on the Red Top Report. And I think by the time this show comes out, the Red Top will have come out. If you haven't seen that show, that episode, if you haven't seen Red Top, I would urge everyone to watch it because Red Top's a great show. And obviously, this is a big thing in the news. But anyway, on this topic, Joe, what do you think?
Yeah, it's actually interesting that you chose to do this topic when you did, because I hadn't even really told you about this before you had written it. But you talk. I had recently started doing marriage prep with my fiance, so gonna be getting married soon. Super exciting, super exciting. Great girl, best woman I could have ever chosen to marry, and we were talking about.
Is she a bohemian chick with pretty eyes?
She is not bohemian. She is, I would say, near the Luxembourg-German border, or something like that. I think that's
a lovely reference. I like that. Let's just move on. Talk about taxes.
So, anyways, we went into the marriage prep, and I was talking to the priest, and one of the first things I brought up was actually a concern that you brought up here, where everybody's like, well, look, I don't want my money going to a diocese that, because I'm in the Archdiocese of Detroit, that goes and attacks, who in all intents and purposes seems like a faithful priest like Father Perone, and tries to silence him, attack him, and shut him down. I didn't want to support that, and he basically explained to me, just like you did in here, that the diocese is going to get its cut no matter how you give to us, and that was pretty upsetting for me to find out that was happening. But it's like you do kind of have to bite the bullet. You do kind of have to suck it up and accept the fact that the people that are in charge are the people that are in charge, and that you shouldn't be punishing your priest. You shouldn't be punishing your parish and the well-being of all of the spiritual life of the entire area in which that parish is ministering to, just because you have a problem with something that the Archdiocese itself is doing.
Yeah, and as well, I think there's another issue there. The finance guy at my parish, because I was actually, again, I asked him. He's on the parish council, what have you, and he's the accountant or the treasurer or the bookkeeper, whatever that is. He's the finance dude. And I was asking him, how can I be contributing to the parish without a slice going to these things? And he said, look, just as you said, they've got this sewn up. They know all the tricks. They know all the ways to do it. But equally, he said something that struck me and kind of inspired this show. He said, the diocese has legitimate needs. For example, the seminary. Or we talk about the vocations crisis. Well, okay, first you've got to get raw material in terms of young men to come in. Okay, that's a whole problem. It's a whole thing. But when you've got those young men in there, well, how do you pay for their education? How do you pay for this stuff? How do you pay for the tribunal, for the administrative qualities that the diocese needs? There's a reason that there aren't just 10,000 parishes in the world, all of whom answer to the Pope. There is this very, realistic sense that we have a hierarchical structure where a parish reports to a diocese, which reports to the Vatican. And so there is a need for some degree of government and some degree of governance in the church. And so, it's like, absolutely, we need to support the church. And as I said, and as you agreed, Joe, this is like, you're only going to hurt the priest.
Yeah, and here's the other aspect of this entire thing that bothers me the most is that we tried financial protest, where people were like, you guys are going to start doing as we ask, or we're not going to be supporting you, this, that, and the other. And you know what the bishops did? Instead of actually fixing the problem, what they did was like, okay, well, we're just going to import new parishioners from Mexico and have them fill the pews, and we'll do Spanish masses. They're not going to do what you want.
Yeah.
They're not going to do what you want, and more importantly, they don't have to.
No.
They don't have to do what you want. They're hierarchs. They're above you. They don't have to listen to you. They don't have to do those things. And from my perspective, that's why, financially supporting the diocese is only going to help you, gain interest over what they do and don't do in the future, as opposed to having them go seek out parishioners that are not the parishioners from the local area.
Yeah, no. All right, Joe, well, that's about all we have got time for. I will let you go away and drink some honey and some lemon and decide what you're next going to spend your voice on, who you're next going to yell to. If you haven't checked it out, do check out Joe's show, Red Top Report. Joe, thank you so much. And now we will be going to our gentleman's chat, and the gentleman's chat is not with our usual gentleman. No, we have a different gentleman. This time, we of course have our very own Bradley Eli. Brad, thank you so much for joining us here on Hardline. Now, there was a previous Hardline episode where I asked the question, is the Pope the Pope? And my answer was yes. Pope Francis is the Pope, unfortunately. And I kind of said, we have to obey the Pope. We have to do exactly what he says. And then you, after that show, you came up to me and said, I've got a bit of a counterpoint and some thoughts that I'd like to share. So here you are to share them, Brad.
Well, it's a very Catholic stance. The Pope is the Pope. I mean, how can you refute that? And we're not here to refute that, just a nuance and a counterpoint on that first topic before we move in about ignoring and or possibly obeying the Pope. Now, I have to say I got a word of this chat a little while ago, and I prepared copious notes, okay? I took my cue from Amy Coney Barrett and a little Caesar's napkin. I got all my notes right there, so I'm all good to go here. Now, the Pope is the Pope. There's a distinction, moral certitude and absolute metaphysical certitude. Now, the fact is, moral certitude, which is what you act on in a moral way. You have to have moral certitude that something is good or something, to do that, or something is bad to avoid that. And in gray areas, you withhold your activity. Now, at the end of a shooting range, for instance, if you see a shadow down there and it may or may not be somebody, then you can't pull the trigger. You actually have to have moral certitude that is just a shadow down at the end that you're shooting at, target practicing there. Anyway, with the Pope situation, we all have only moral certitude. Now we say only, that's everything. That's how you act on your life. Now, there was 30 times in the church, the trusted apparatus said, this is the Pope. Then we had moral certitude as the Pope. Years later, 30 different times or more actually, the trusted apparatus comes out and says that's not the Pope. Sorry, we need to redo that situation. So when that happens, if that happens, then we would have moral certitude that Pope Francis wasn't the Pope, because the trusted apparatus later looked into it, confirmed that particular point right there. And we all are still Catholic. Everything still goes on. The church is not capsized. The bark of Peter still floats. So that particular thing right there, the fact is people today do on social media, and this is what you're actually hitting back on the hard line, is that all these people cavalierly say, oh, I'm pontificating that this isn't the Pope, that's not, whatever. You don't have moral certitude of that. You have absolute no moral certitude, even on something like the death penalty change. Oh, he's a heretic. No, even Cardinal Mueller comes out and says, well, that's a matter of prudential judgment. I don't know if he wants it to be applied less or more, but it's not in principle violating something we could call a guy a heretic. So anyway, that's the situation. You can't go and pontificate that the Pope is not the Pope.
Yeah.
You don't have absolute metaphysical certitude.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So you've drawn this distinction between a moral certitude, it's kind of like a certitude that we are bound to act on, and this notion of metaphysical certitude as some sort of like absolute cast iron notion of certitude. I mean, really, Brad, are there that many things in the world, in the universe, that we could say we have metaphysical certitude about?
Well, that's why they call it metaphysical. A thing can't be and not be at the same time, the same way. Well, that's what you call metaphysical certitude. You actually have certitude about that. But as far as even were you actually adopted or not, you don't totally know they didn't make a mistake in the hospital. You have moral certitude that these are my biological parents. They have moral certitude of that, but only the beatific vision looking back. So like, oh my goodness, they put the wrong band on somebody. Mm-hmm. A Jacob and Esau moment happened where, an arm came out and they put a band on that and they went back in and everything else. So that's the situation. That we do have a lot of things in life that we don't absolutely have nailed down that could not possibly be some other way. But what you're talking about on Hardline and what the people are, hitting back on the social media, everybody in their, dog is out there saying, oh, I'm just certain that this isn't the Pope. Why? Because, he doesn't wear this particular garment, or because he said this night, some little snippet on an airplane, and therefore I think he's a heretic, and therefore he's, it's not given that way for us. We don't have, that's above our pay grade.
Well, and I think as well, it's interesting that you're kind of saying, and you're characterizing these, talking heads on social media and elsewhere as saying, I'm certain the Pope isn't the Pope. And I don't even know if that's what they're saying. It's almost like these guys are saying, well, I'm not certain if the Pope is the Pope, or if he isn't the Pope, or if he is or not. I'm not certain. I'm just saying, I'm just asking questions, which becomes very irresponsible because, of course, the moment you put that information out, what people hear is a profession of some degree of certitude, and then they go and act on that certitude that is no certitude at all.
Right, and when you do say, I'm not certain of that, if you're talking about absolute metaphysical certitude, fine, but in your moral life, you have to still act upon what you're morally certain of, and you're only morally certain of what the trusted apparatus of the church has told you about this. And apart from that, you can't act such as social media blasts out all their, maybe not as a Pope. That's actually scandalous, and that's actually something that would actually mar you spiritually and other people, and you have to take into account on Judgment Day. Yeah, no,
I think I kind of talked a lot about that. I mean, I'm very glad that you've come on here to talk about this idea of moral certitude versus metaphysical certitude, because I was talking about this idea of the Pope is presented to us by the Church as the Pope, and the Church is promised that no, the gates of hell will not prevail. But there was also, you had a really great take on this whole notion of obeying the Pope. And we talked after I'd shot the show, and it kind of stopped me in my tracks. And I was like, wow, that is a good, hard, solid take. So let's tell the people at home what that was, Brad.
Okay, well, there's two things that were mentioned in the show. Both of them are solid, okay? One, you got to obey the Pope. That's a common understanding thing. Your spiritual director will tell you whatever. And then number two, you can't ignore the Pope. Okay, well, that's all. You can't refute that type of thing. But there's a nuanced counterpoint. I've been under 5 popes, and in religious life and in the church, you actually, in obedience, you have to have something in writing where the Pope or whoever the superior is writes to you specifically and says you will do this under pain of these particular censure, and signs it, and you have to sign it, and then it becomes an obedience. There is no such thing as that with the Pope for us as laymen, lay people out here. And like I said, I've been under 5 popes, and nothing in my life has ever changed. A church that I go to, they actually allow they had the Novus Ordo Mass, and they did a great job with that, Ad Orientem, and they did the Gregorian chant and all these things. You wouldn't hardly be able to tell it wasn't the Tridentine Mass. Mm-hmm. Then they were petitioning Maida for many, many years, whether Cardinal Maida back then is the head of
happy memory
of Detroit. And he basically wouldn't grant the indult to have the traditional Mass. So they just kept moving on forward. Well, that doesn't mean me having to obey the Pope. I still go to church. Mm-hmm. Whether it was a Novus Ordo Latin, whether it was Ad Orientem or not, it's still valid. Jesus shows up, and so do I, to receive that. So this idea that, you have to obey the Pope as if you're slavishly tied to one person, there's a whole apparatus in the church, canon law, catechism, 10 commandments, don't change. None of that stuff changes. And I have to assume that the Pope is still leading us down the same path. And if somehow it seems a little fuzzy in the weeds out there, I still have 2,000 years of an arrow pointing forward, and I still do live my life. So that thing's kind of a bit overblown where people, and it's common out there where people are like, I don't have to obey the Pope. What do they mean by that? I don't have to go to Mass anymore. I don't have to do anything anymore because I'm not obeying the Pope. Well, no, you stop being Catholic then.
Yeah, I think it was actually, I was talking to my wife about this issue because, of course, recently, Pope Francis celebrated 10 years on the chair of Peter. And I was kind of said to my wife, because she was like, oh my gosh, it's been so confusing and terrible and it's, caused all these problems. And I said to her, how has our faith life, our lived faith experience, how has that changed under Francis compared to under Benedict or even, under John Paul? I spent 1 week under John Paul as a Catholic. I became Catholic a week before John Paul died. But I said, how is our faith life? And it's like, yeah, we go to Mass, we go to adoration, we go to confession, we say our rosaries, we fast when the church says to fast, we give alms to the church, we obey the moral teachings of the church. Our life has continued in much the same way. Now, it may be very confusing, it may be a bit hairy, it may be a bit kind of uncertain, and we do get somewhat scandalized, and it's difficult when evangelizing people. But really, our faith practice doesn't really change.
No, and on the hard line there was, well, you can't ignore the Pope. Well, true, but I've been under 5 popes, and I don't really have, like you exactly said, how's your faith life changed? So this ignoring, you don't have to be tuned into, CNN every day to find out the latest little hiccup that happened or the off-the-cuff remark that the Pope said. Trust that he's leading the path correctly. If somehow he's deviating, he has to answer to God for that. But you've had 2,000 years of tradition, and you just keep living the 10 Commandments, going to the Catholic Mass, receiving the sacraments, and your faith life really hasn't changed. Under all 5 popes, I do the same that I've been doing under any of them. So, in a sense, you kind of do have a holy ignorance of things, and in that, ignorance is bliss in a certain sense.
Well, yeah, absolutely wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Hardline, Brad. I think we will probably have you back later for more gentlemen's chats, but it is absolutely superb to get your take on this very important issue. Brad, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Wonderful to speak to Brad there. Brad always has great insights, always got something wonderful to say. And don't forget, the download is coming back. So if you want to see Brad and I chatting, along with Mike Voris and Christine Niles, and maybe other special guests and so forth, the download is coming back in the near future. And that's going to be a premium show, just like this one, just like Forward Boldly, just like the Michael Voris Show. So please, if you have not yet subscribed to premium, please do. Remember, are people good enough to employ? Then they should be good enough to pay. That applies to the church. It also applies to us as well. I'm Simon Rafe, and I've taken the Hardline.